Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a we're going to do a video about how you can start to approach the Second World War as a topic. This isn't going to be a list of books that I think that you should read on the Second World War, primarily because I haven't read enough books to be able to tell you these are what you should read, these are the best ones. But also because that's been done. Steve Donohue's done an excellent video on that exact thing, where he gives you a starter set, and it's a list of books covering various topics, and tells you can go read these if you want to find out more about the war. This video that I'm going to do is going to be more of an overview of how you can think about the war and use that model as an approach for reading about it, because it's such a big topic. I think that you kind of need a little bit of a primer to get into it. Some of us have learnt about the war in school in some brief detail, some of us may have done further study on it, but when you really dive deep into it, there's a lot more to the war than probably most people have come across beforehand, before doing any serious study. And so it can be useful to have some sort of a model for knowing that you're hitting all the points. So I will recommend some books though. So when I think about the war, I think about kind of 5 primary wars that go on that then fit into the larger whole. This isn't a technical way of understanding it. It's not a perfect way of understanding it either, but I think it's useful for when you're approaching the war to make sure you're touching all your bases. And those are the Western Front, so the war in France and Belgium, the Battle of Britain, those sorts of things. The Eastern Front, so the war in Russia and Eastern Europe, Africa and the Mediterranean, which I kind of group into one, but you could probably separate them. And that's looking at like the war in Northern Africa, in Egypt, in the Middle East, like that sort of war, and then also the war through Italy and the Mediterranean. And then the 4th war, I would say, is like the war at sea. So the Battle of the Atlantic, the supplying of the Russian war effort through the Arctic convoys, those sorts of things. So just that aspects of the war. And then obviously the war against Japan in the Pacific. So those are like kind of the broad 5 areas that I think are worth sort of making sure that you're touching on. And in terms of reading, to understand how those different aspects work, I think it's worth getting a book and reading a book that kind of does a broad overview. Shows you the ebbs and flows of the wars, when did Germany have an advantage and where did they attack and when, and then how do they start to lose that advantage and why did that happen? Those sorts of things, right? So it can be very useful to have that broad overview. There are 2 books which I think are really good for doing this. The first I actually have a physical copy of here, and that is The Second World War by Antony Beevor. It's a 1,000-page book. It basically just gives you a battlefield report from every battle, kind of. It does a bit more than that, but that's kind of what it's doing. And it tells you how the war happened. Very, very useful in understanding the Second World War. I'll just pop that back here rather than reaching up again. So that's that one. The other one is, I don't actually have a copy of, but I have read it. It is called All Hell Let Loose by Max Hastings. I believe it's published under Inferno in some markets, probably I think the US. And that is doing a similar thing, but it takes a kind of high level view and looks at things like soldiers' experiences and some of the strategic considerations and political considerations, economic considerations. So I think those 2 put together will stand you in really good stead from a high level to understand how the war happens. This book is really useful to actually have a copy of, because it gives you such like fine detail about each of the battles. If you're reading other books later on and you want to come back to just like read a summary of a battle, this is a really good, like, useful book to have just on hand for reference. So then, kind of nailing down into each of those 5 areas that I talked about before. For the war at sea, I've got 2 recommendations here. There's the Battle of the Atlantic by Jonathan Dimbleby, and there is the World War II at Sea by Craig Simmons. Both of these are excellent books. I actually borrowed these from the library, so I don't have copies of them. But they are excellent. They kind of describe to you how the convoys worked, why they were important, some of the political considerations. The Battle of the Atlantic has great writing about the interplay between FDR and Churchill and Stalin, and how the politics and all of that came into the war at sea. It also has really excellent commentary on the Germans and how the interplay between the war in the air and the war at sea are like pulling against each other, and where resources are getting put and those sorts of things. So that's very, very interesting to read. For the Pacific War, I haven't actually read a ton of the Pacific War yet. It's definitely on my to-do list for this year. There is a trilogy which is supposedly very good, by Ian W. Toll. I think the first one is The Pacific Crucible. It then goes on to The Conquering Tide, and then The Twilight of the Gods. So those have been sitting in my shopping cart for a while, and I'm definitely going to get them. I also borrowed from Steve Donahue. He recommends The Pacific War by John Costello. I imagine that one's also very good. That's probably what I will start with before diving into the trilogy. On the Eastern Front, the Eastern Front by Norman Stone is an excellent book, as well as Russia at War by Alexander Wirth. This is the really crucial part to understand. Unfortunately, there's not that much detail, or there's not that much that's been written about it when you compare it to the Western Front. So books can be few and far between to find, especially if you're in a Western country. If you go to a bookstore, you're going to find much more on the Western Front than the Eastern Front. But absolutely crucial to understanding how the war happened. Definitely read about that. I wouldn't say before reading about everything else, but definitely you need, that's a priority, because that is where the outcome of the war hinged, I would say. And then the Western Front in Africa, Anthony Beevor and Max Hastings actually have a series of books. They've written for a long time in the Second World War, and they have a whole series of books where, actually I've got Anthony Beevor's D-Day here. So there's a whole series of books that, like, D-Day, I think he's got one of the Ardennes, he's got basically any big battle you can think of. Anthony Beevor, so here I've got on the back here, I've actually got this Stalingrad, so that's on the Eastern Front. And then Arnhem, the Battle for the Bridges, 1944, is by Anthony Beevor as well. Max Hastings has a whole series as well. So if you like the writing style of one of these authors, then definitely pick up a bunch of their books, and you can start to read about the Western Front in Africa in a lot more detail. And then also the Eastern Front. I didn't think about it before starting to film this video, but Anthony Beevor did write a very good book on Stalingrad. So I'm just going to pop that back here. Next, we've got to talk about the people. That is another way of understanding the war. Is the main players, so Hitler, Stalin, FDR, and Churchill. So they're like kind of a big four. So understanding them and their contribution to the war is going to be a very useful way of understanding how the war happened. So I've got actually 3 recommendations up here, so I'll just grab them down. So for Hitler, you can't really go past Ian Kershaw's biography, just called Hitler. He did publish this in 2 volumes originally. They were Hubris and Nemesis, and Nemesis is the one that focuses on the war. If you can find that and you really want a ton of detail on Hitler during the war, you can read that. It can be a little bit difficult to find though. This one is quite easy to find. Pretty much every bookstore you go to is probably going to have a copy. So this is a good one to pick up. And you can just read, if you really want to, you can just read the sections on the Second World War. For Stalin, actually I stole Steve Donahue's recommendation for Stalin because I haven't read a single volume on him. So there is a biography called Stalin. It's just the title is just Stalin. It's by Edvard Radzinsky. I don't know how to say that. That's a Russian name, I think. So there's a single volume you can read. Stephen Kotkin obviously is publishing his trilogy at the moment on Stalin. So this is volume 2, Waiting for Hitler, 1929 to 1941. And there is obviously the volume 1, and volume 3 is in progress now. I don't know when it's going to come out. So I can't recommend that right now, but that one will be great to read on Stalin during the Second World War. So that's one recommendation. As for Churchill, I really like Andrew Roberts' Churchill, Walking with Destiny. It's obviously a single volume life, so there's a lot of detail about Churchill before and after the war, but you can read the sections on the war if that's what you want to do. William Manchester published a trilogy on Churchill. William Manchester and Paul Reed. I don't know exactly, I can't remember off the top of my head who wrote the final volume. The final volume is called Defender of the Realm. It was published in 2012, I believe, and that is on the Second World War, Churchill during the Second World War. So that's one you can read. And then for FDR, there's the classic biography by Robert Dalek, which you can find. It's published in the Penguin paperback, so the ones that have this orange spine. So very easy to find, very cheap. Definitely one to pick up. So apart from that, there's also popular history. These are useful to read because they give you an understanding of the war from a different perspective, like kind of the myths that grow up around the war, rather than just like a purely technical historical perspective. Something like Stephen E. Ambrose's Band of Brothers is great for that. I don't particularly like the way Stephen E. Ambrose writes, but obviously this is a hugely popular and successful book. It was adapted into the TV series by Tom Hanks, and worth reading if you want to read it. It's quite short. It's like it's less than 300 pages, so you can get through it very quickly. And yeah, definitely worth reading if you want to read that. There's a ton on the Second World War in terms of popular history. The Splendid and the Vile. There's all the spy stories that were written. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Ben McIntyre, that's his name. He's written a series of books about spying in the Second World War. All of these sorts of things are worth reading if you want to understand the Second World War culturally. Anyway, so that's what I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you got some useful recommendations, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.